Our last talk is going to be by Gaelan Smith. Gaelan does data visualization, connecting people to their information, actions, and outcomes, and to each other. They currently create dashboards and reports for federal agencies focused on DEIA and performance metrics. His consulting firm, Excella, is rolling out DORA-based software development transformation, and he is excited to share what he has learned about visualizing that for success. With that, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Gaelan Smith, and I'm a GoodRx user. But that's not what I'm talking about at all. Oh, very much currently. Yeah, let's not talk about American healthcare. But I am stoked to talk to you all about business intelligence in general. Shout out to DVS for including all of us making our fantastic corporate dashboards out there. But specifically harnessing your data viz skills to reflect and shape the outcomes you want for your teams. So I'm a data viz developer at a full stack consulting firm. And so we, like many of us here, go into a client and have to talk about how they're going to achieve their goals. Oops, there we go. Oh no. In the 17th century, or, as the story goes, paleontologists realized that Chinese people were using dinosaur bones for medicinal purposes. So they were like, cool, you're doing all the work to dig this up for us. We're going to pay you. Any piece of dinosaur bone you bring to us, we're going to give you some money. So what did they do? They smashed up all the dinosaur bones. In the former USSR, again, urban legend, who knows, managers of glass plants were given incentives based on tons of sheet glass produced per period. The plants produced sheet glass so thick you couldn't see through it. And so they were like, no, that's not what we mean. So instead we're going to reward you by the square meter. Do we have a guess? Yes, they produced sheet glass so thin it couldn't be used for anything. And more recently in the US, Wells Fargo, that's a bank here in the US, well, global bank, they heavily incentivized their sales teams to open as many new accounts as possible. The feds didn't take too kindly to the massive number of fake accounts they created to do it. So these examples are amusing unless you're the one paying the Wells Fargo fines. But what could this look like in your world? Maybe your security team incentivizes cleaning up as many bugs as possible as quickly as possible. So your team focuses on quantity, solving minor and easy problems instead of tackling the really important and more time-consuming complex issues. Maybe your social media team's like, we had a big uptick in traffic, only to find out that they've actually lost the real engagement that they need. Maybe your content team has worked so hard to drive up time on site that they're creating repetitive content that's actually losing the valuable customer contact. And one that I bet a lot of us in this room and online can identify with is your top performers get work done more quickly, so you reward them with more work. And so over time, they don't get their work done as quickly. And morale tanks too. Oops. Sorry, I have 2 clicks going on at once here. It's great. I can multitask, I promise. So all of these are examples of Goodhart's law. Any observed statistical regularity will tend to collapse once pressure is placed on it for control purposes. Or when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. When you care too much about a number, the number is what matters, not what is influencing the number. Instead of producing more useful sheets of glass, you focus only on the weight or the size, neither of which is what you actually care about. So, what does all this have to do with maps? I had no idea I was going to follow an entire day talking about actual cartography. This is all an entire play on words. But let's talk about transformation. So many of us do produce dashboards, either in the business world or in other circumstances, to both reflect and change or transform how work gets done. It could be your sales teams, it could be HR processes, student supports, or software development. To do this effectively, you need to focus not on the work that gets done, but how your team operates. The ways that you support these efforts with your dashboards or decks or reports, the maps you provide, are going to fundamentally impact behaviors. What you choose to show and how you choose to show it might lead to the gains that you're looking for. Or it could lead to harmful gamification that negatively impacts your workflow and your product and possibly even your workplace culture. Maps both reflect the world around us. Where are the rivers? Where are the oceans? And they shape the world to what we want it to be. Let's put lots of detail around the river harbors to get people interested there, to get people to invest there. And let's put dragons in the ocean to keep people away. You're going to do the same thing. You want to shine your light where you want people to go and steer them away from where you want them to avoid. So when you're building your map, you want to think about how you want to disrupt the way we've always done it. That applies to the actual processes currently in place. After all, if they were working, you wouldn't be doing a transformation. But as data visors, you want to disrupt the expected ways of visualizing the data. Your goal is to encourage the behaviors you want and disrupt negative or unintended consequences, hopefully before they happen. You have to think outside the same old charts and metrics and dashboard that everybody else seems to think is working just fine. You then want to guide your teams to uncover what is going on under the hood of these processes. What is going well, what could be improved, and what could be scrapped entirely. Where are you shining your light? And finally, you'll both reflect and shape the behaviors as the transformation happens. So to explore how you might think through what to visualize and how to frame it and how to anticipate consequences before they play out, I'm going to use examples from a methodology known as DORA, or DevOps Research and Assessment. And all of y'all with kids just went, oh, I get the you need a map, because that's one of the songs, right. I had to throw it in there. So DORA does focus specifically on software dev teams, but many of the principles can be used either directly or modified to fit a huge array of business environments. The research team behind DORA applies behavioral science to look at the pathways that connect ways of working to organizational goals and individual well-being. It has a set of metrics that we'll get into in a minute to evaluate process performance and maturity. And as I mentioned, it can be used as is or modified to fit your purposes. You can find out a lot more at dora.dev. I want to be clear, I'm not trying to sell this methodology. If you want that, contact me. My business would love to talk to you. I don't work for the team. This isn't about DORA. I'm using this as an example to talk through how can we think about metrics, just to be clear. So DORA has, as I mentioned, 5 key metrics: deployment frequency, lead time for change, change failure rate, time to restore service, and reliability. There's not going to be a quiz. Don't worry if you didn't catch all that. Like I said, DORA is focused on software dev, and so the metrics reflect that. So we're only going to focus on the first 2, deployment frequency and lead time for change. So the software dev definition for deployment frequency is how often a development team releases new features, bug fixes, or improvements to a live production environment. Basically, how often do you get finalized work to where it needs to be? What that might look like in your world is how often do you publish a press release or a white paper? How often do you deliver financial statements? How often do you update your blog? Or for many of us, how often do you push your dashboard to prod? Looking at lead time for change, the software dev definition is how long it takes for a code change to move from the development stage to being successfully deployed in the production environment? Or put another way, how long does it take to go from a polished draft through the review process to finalized or live? So what that might look like for you is you've put your dashboard into staging. How long does it take to get through the review process, user testing, et cetera, and into production? So let's start with deployment frequency, or how often you produced finished work. So how should you frame this to support your team's effort to get more work finalized in a timely manner? So the obvious option is to count how many things you publish in a given time frame and visualize it, possibly against a target of how many things you want to publish in a given time frame. And there are advantages to this method. It gives visibility into how much work you're producing, and it's easy to see changes in the amount of work that you've produced over time. But there are challenges, things to consider. If the emphasis is only on the end result, the number of things published quickly, your team might start producing less comprehensive work without thoughtfully segregating and segmenting the work to maintain quality. They might skimp on their research or rigorous development or quality checks to get done faster. And driving towards raw counts like that might not be sustainable long term. It could lead to burnout. Hey, you published a blog post a day for an entire month, and now your entire team needs a week of sick leave because they're totally fried. So let's talk about a better option. So what you could do is visualize work as it moves through the steps. This could look like a workflow style diagram with a count of moves, with maybe also a count of what work is in each one of the stages. So the advantages to this method is that it highlights how many steps there are. Can these be simplified? Can they be rearranged? It shows where the pauses or the backups are happening. Is a lot moving into director sign-off, but only moves out in periodic batches whenever they can get to it. It shows how much work is in, whoops, sorry, skipped a step. It breaks down the big picture of getting the work produced into actionable areas. If there's a bottleneck at the director sign-off, do they need to sign off on everything? How can you change the process at that specific point? And it shows how much work is in progress at any given time, in what steps, and what's coming up through the pipeline so that you and your team can make informed decisions. Now, this does still come with its own challenges, right? It can be hard to get the granularity right. You don't want to capture every single move, but you want it to be specific enough to know that review phase includes maybe your team testing, and then maybe you have an outside team that signs off, and then director sign off. So that you learn that, hey, the problem is at director sign off and your team testing is fine, that doesn't need to change. It also doesn't allow for the easy course, which is the one that the raw counts lead to, which is just do more and do it faster. This forces you to take time to examine how the work is progressing, not just that it is progressing. And this is a problem a lot of times when you get more complex, is that you can end up spending more time defining the steps and tracking them than doing the work. So as a visualizer, you want to make your visualization as simple as gives you actionable, digestible information and no more. So now, how do you know if this is working, right? If your frequency is high or it's increasing and your quality is also high or increasing, that's a sign that your processes are getting more efficient. If your frequency is low or decreasing, that could indicate bottlenecks or inefficiencies. But be mindful of the J curve, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Also, be aware of your quality. This is where you might see some of those unintended consequences. You have to keep the whole picture in mind. So now, looking at lead time for change, or how long it takes something to go from polished draft to finalized. The obvious option here is to record the timestamp when a draft is submitted for review, and the timestamp when it's finalized or made live or whatever your version is, and visualize the difference between the two. And so the advantages of this one is that, well, it gives visibility into how long things are taking, specifically in the review process. And depending on how you visualize it, it shows how much work is in a partially approved state, which can be really helpful. But what are the challenges to this one? Well, it leads to a rushed review or a rushed testing or quality checks or whatever, and can even lead to just skipping steps entirely. I'm sure none of you here have ever just kind of crossed your fingers and pushed something to live. That never happens. But it might to somebody else. And another unintended consequence to look out for is, what if people just sit on a draft until it's perfect, so that then they hope that they can just rush it through the approval, start the clock as late as possible, and shove it through approvals faster? So that's something to watch out for. So a better option here is that you could use that time tracking that you've captured to identify bottlenecks and inefficiency in a blame-free environment. You could visualize the time spent, again, in each step. You can also pair this with your rework, post-production or post-going live. And that gives you a holistic view of where to invest time. If your faster draft to final process leads to more rework, not only are you not saving time, but you're damaging the reputation of your work. On the flip side, if your draft to final pipeline gets faster and you're not doing any more rework, you don't actually have mistakes going live. Maybe all those checks and balances weren't really materially impacting your process, and you can confidently get rid of them, which can really help bolster confidence in some of the changes that you're making. That's where your holistic visualizations and your holistic thought process can really help drive sustainable change. So some advantages to this method is that it addresses the underlying causes of where time is being spent. Again, going back to the previous example, if your team testing is going just fine, but the director's sign-off is where the problem is, then you know exactly what you need to address. It also uncovers where slowdowns are unavoidable, so that you can plan for and around them. If the director insists, no, I have to sign off on everything, maybe you can give them a check sheet to say, all right, these are the things you need to look at to keep them on task, to keep them going faster. But this one also comes with its challenges. So like the deployment frequency, this requires deep work and awareness. You have to examine every step, and you need to find the real and sustainable solutions without shame and blame. Again, you can't rely on the whole just go faster, which is the easy one to get to. And this is an interesting one to think about. This might lead to some management considerations. It might open the door to some creative solutions that you find with the team doing the work that goes against maybe some established norms. And so you need to think about how you're presenting your work, how you're presenting your visualizations and your conclusions to be able to manage that as it goes. So what about that J-curve that I mentioned? This will almost certainly show up in any trends that you produce for any type of transformation that you're working on. So just be ready for it. So what does this look like? Your team starts out at the current state and identifies quick wins that they want to tackle first. And huzzah, they work, yay, we see gains, everything is going great. And then the new and exciting process runs into reality. Work will back up, things will take longer as people get used to the new processes. There's going to be some trial and error as people see what works. Frustrations are going to mount. Don't be afraid to show this. Don't be afraid to see that this happens. Because what you should see is that as the team works through all of this, the backed up work is going to start to clear. The processes will start to become routine, and everybody's going to figure out which of these changes actually work and go forward with them and drop the ones that aren't working. And at that point, that's when you're going to really start to see the big gains and the sustainable gains. And obviously, this isn't a one-time thing, right? Every single new part of the transformation, you're going to see this sort of thing. By knowing this is going to happen, by being ready for this, you'll be ahead of the story. And this is another place that you can disrupt unintended consequences. Like, oh, the trend line went down. We need to fix it with some knee-jerk response that's not part of the plan. Maybe you have morale that tanks. Hey, we're doing all this work. This is kind of a pain and it's not even paying off. And some people might say, well, the trend line went down. The whole thing is scrapped. And so being ready for this, being willing to show it, being on top of and ahead of that puts you in front of the story and the unintended consequences. So with all these points in mind, how can you as data visitors show if the transformation efforts are working? So here are some things to think about while choosing what to show and how. You want to evaluate at the team level, not the whole organization and not the individual. So this whole process is around processes and behavior, systemic changes. Teams can make measurable changes in those. The organization's metrics just follow what the teams have done, and usually with a lag. Individuals cannot change holistic or systemic processes. Focusing on them causes blame and shame and is almost always going to lead to negative consequences. Paired up with that is don't pit teams against each other. Every team needs to find out what works for them. Even teams that are supposedly doing the same work, like maybe you have a couple different sales teams or whatever, each team is going to have different brains, different experience, different personalities, and probably at least slightly different workflows. Support your teams, don't make them fight. You want to annotate trends. What happened and when and what was the result? And you want to focus on what is actionable. The winter holidays happen every year. You're not going to stop that. But when did you put your adjusted deliverable schedule in? Did it have the impact that you expected? And it's okay to show if it didn't. It's okay to say, we tried a new deliverable schedule over the holidays, and it is the exact same thing that we have seen for the past 5 years. That's information, right? Something not working is still informative. You don't want to present trends without targets or without context. It's too easy to make uneducated guesses, to know what actions led to which results or what results are worth taking action on. You want to focus on friction. Where can you shine a light on bottlenecks and inefficiencies, not on people? And this one is hard, this one is weird, but you don't focus on productivity. Productivity follows when you address the friction. So that's how to tell if your transformation changes are working. What about how to tell if people are, in fact, gaming the system to drive your metrics rather than implementing real and logical and sustainable changes? So as you build and adjust your map through the transformation process, stay close to the people who are doing the work. Review how things are going, check in, what do they need in order to have the best experience and do their best work? Are you shaping the behaviors you want rather than encouraging shortcuts to an outcome? Be prepared for that J-curve. Be prepared to explain it to management and to the people doing the work. Again, morale can take a hit through this. Be ready for that. Explain what steps the team has taken, what they expect the outcome to be, and when they expect to see changes. Is this something that we're going to see by the next deployment? Is this something we're going to see in 6 months? And you want to integrate the metrics into the whole story. I've been sitting here saying, oh, rethink metrics, right? Metrics are still critical, but they're part of the story. They're a piece of the story when you want to talk about the entire experience and all of the behaviors together. So these two metrics, deployment frequency and lead time for change and all this software dev stuff, those are just examples. I'm fairly confident you all can extrapolate to your own world. But what I wanted to talk about was what to visualize, how to frame it, and how to anticipate the consequences before they play out. So whatever you're trying to visualize, think about setting it up to disrupt the status quo, both in terms of the processes themselves and how your visualizations influence behavior. You want to guide your teams and stakeholders to discover what's under the hood of those processes. And you want to reflect and shape the behaviors throughout the transformation. This should lead to better conversations, reducing that harmful gamification, and both reflect and drive the transformation. So thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was actionable. And my info is up there, and I look forward to any questions.
Wow, that's a lot to think about to wrap up a day.
Yeah, I'm super happy that we're talking about that at the end of the day.
Absolutely. When I think about exciting moments to close a DataViz conference out, it's definitely with organizational transformation that gets complicated because of change.
Right. I can tell everybody is edge of their seat right now.
All right, edge of the seat. I see the Discover Financial team. Thanks, Kevin. Right there with the people who deploy dashboards. You're like, deployment frequency. I've got this. Do we have any questions from the audience or from our online folks? All right. I think one thing I would like to ask to kind of like bring this all home for the day and kind of tie it back to data visualizations is how do your teams, or have you seen teams, use data visualization as a tool for monitoring or getting a company or a team on the same board with what's happening? You mentioned showing and visualizing the data a lot during this presentation, and I'm wondering kind of how the idea of doing this and tracking these metrics translates into a dashboard, something else?
So you noticed that I presented a DataViz conversation at a DataViz conference with no DataViz. Is that what you're saying?
I did notice that.
Yeah, so we're actually working on building those dashboards right now, and this is, as anything, it's an iterative process. In a lot of ways, we are kind of making this up as we go, which has been a really interesting process. And a lot of it is breaking the traditional of we want a big number, we want to see how that big number changes. And it's going to the teams and understanding what is the thing that we actually want to change and how do we measure that? It is, where is the friction? And so instead of having a big number that's, hey, we had this many deployments, it's saying, it might be the time, or like I mentioned, the number of steps. We might have those. And we do still have that number up at the top, right? We still have how many deployments did we have in what given time, because we still need to know that. But it's what's underneath that. And it's really making sure that we're not telling our teams what thickness of glass to produce. We're saying how many useful things, how many sustainable things have you been able to do? And each team requires a little bit of different nuance. And so we're actually in the process right now of how do we expand that out to the organizational metrics? Because as we focus on our teams, how do we aggregate that out the one step more? So I don't have the answers right now. We're still working on that, but that's been an interesting part of the process.
I think it's always interesting to think about the ways our tools and our skills get used, not just around like building charts and graphs for clients, but how we use those internally. Do you have a question?
I do. Hi.
Hello.
So I work for an insurance company, and so not very exciting. And our IT department recently adopted Agile methodology, which has been quite the adventure. And you made a comment that I think I've struggled with, I've seen my team struggle with, and other teams as well, where the focus has been now on the metrics themselves versus are we actually improving? Have you seen this with your clients, and how has that been addressed? Because we struggle with that currently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of the heart of what's driving this whole idea is, so you're talking about transformation, right? That's exactly what's happening. We had a similar thing. We went from Agile and sort of Scrum based, and then we tried Kanban, and then we went, oh, not quite. And so how did we make that decision? How did we look at that? I would say with something like Agile is, can you look at your, sorry if I'm getting jargony here, but your story points that you wanted to do, the number of things you wanted to do that you say in your sprint planning, we're going to do 56 story points worth of work. And it turns out that you got 28 story points worth of work. Can you track that over time? Was that one sprint that was an outlier, or are you consistently trying to do more work? And so it might be that that 28 points was exactly what you should be doing, and that you need to adjust expectations. It might be that half your team was on vacation, whatever it is. And that's where you say, what's actionable? It almost doesn't matter how many things you got done in that 26 points. What matters is, did you anticipate your workload, your capacity? Are you planning well? Are your retros helping you move forward? And that's where digging kind of into that, the metrics underneath the metrics and bringing those into the light, I think is, it's a real challenge. It's really hard. And it takes a lot of deep discussion to get to those. And it takes trial and error. Get it wrong. Honestly, get it wrong.
Experiment, right?
Experiment. I think that's a better way to say it. Experiment.
Experiment. So that takes us to time for our last talk. Gaelan, thank you so much for sharing all those insights about Dora.